Hello, good evening, and welcome back once again to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we are taking a look at the media and all the ways that we can guard our minds against the ways that it manipulates us, the ways that we are inundated with behavioral modification techniques, manipulation tactics, and all kinds of hypnotic and dangerous things that are out there in the 21st century media, designed to control our thoughts and direct us towards living in ways that we might not necessarily agree to or with. Last week, we began looking at an article. We had taken a lot of time to dive into conceptual material up until last week, and then we began trying to apply some of that material to another news article like we had done early in the video series. The article that we began to examine was under the headline of "Will Insects' Lab-Grown Meat Replace Traditional Farmed Meat?" We took a look at that and kind of dug into some of the potentials for why the headline is presented the way it is. We found that there is clearly some obfuscation and some nebulous language being used. And just to recap a little bit, by using a sort of truncated or shorthand style in this headline, we are left to guess at the precise contextual frame of what exactly is going to be discussed, which in my view, and I would hope that others share this, please let me know in the comments what your thoughts are, but in my view it reveals an underlying postmodern worldview operating at some level either within the writer of the article, the editor of the publication or online resource, or it could just be that worldview is permeating in and amongst the culture at such a level that it is ubiquitous or kind of always happening. The reason that I say this is due to the fact that the meaning of the article, or at least the underlying agenda or the underlying message that it's trying to portray, is not apparently clear right off the bat. And we're left to apply our own meaning or understanding as our inner assumptions dictate, whatever we think about it based on our either emotional response or any type of past experience with this kind of writing or news media. Those thoughts, those past experiences, those emotions are what will dictate our understanding and our reading if we're not careful to look at this logically. So I realize that this may seem somewhat assumptive on my part in making this claim about the postmodern worldview operating. However, I would argue that whenever we're dealing with media sources that are in any way like nebulous or vague with their presentation of information, I do believe that it's wise to assume that some kind of obfuscation, whatever's happening, it is deliberate, regardless of the intent. There was a conscious choice to present the headline in this way. If we are to keep our minds on guard, as I would hope that if you're watching these videos at this point, you've either jumped on the bandwagon, so to speak, or at least find some value in this idea of keeping our logical faculties, our critical thinking processes, our emotional faculties, in a state of readiness to be able to deal with the manipulations of the world and all of the ways that we are vulnerable. If we're to keep our minds on guard, we must always be pushing ourselves to look for issues at deeper layers beyond just the surface. Like, it's all well and good that we read the headline and it makes sense to us, but we need to look at what's actually being said. We need to sort of dig and see if there's anything that's either nested or layered within the writing. There's an old saying that's like you need to read between the lines, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here. It's very likely that there is no actual malicious intent or nefarious intent behind this headline. Yet, I do think that when meaning and context are in any way obscured, we can be pretty sure that some kind of directed narrative is being given to us, or at least it's at least being pushed into our minds to consider a way of thinking and viewing a certain subject or a set of information that is directed towards a desired understanding by the people that are presenting that information. Whoever is presenting the information is definitely making sure that they control the boundaries of perception, or rather in what ways that information is being understood by the reader. I see that this title that we're dealing with in this article leaves just enough room for the writer to then springboard off of that negative space that they've left through the vagueness that they chose to use. They've set themselves up to be able to continue throughout the article in such a way as to develop their context while we read along, rather than set us up to be able to understand from the beginning. This is subtle, and it's often hard to detect, but it's also a very powerful manipulative tactic. I welcome discussion on this issue, as I see it could be viewed in other ways by other people, yet I do encourage those who watch this video to think about your initial emotional reactions when you read the headline for the first time. How did it make you feel? And please remember that my aim here is not to encourage anyone to shut their minds off completely when we see things like this, if we're, perceiving some type of manipulation or some form of obfuscation, no matter how trivial. Rather, I would hope that we all work to see it clearly for what it is, so that we can then continue logically and then begin to rationally think about and engage with the media that we find ourselves inundated with. Remember, these are just like words that are being left out, but they really do shift the tone and direction and context of the overall picture that we're going to be looking at. With that out of the way, let's read a little bit further into the article and see if my initial assumptions about a directed narrative hold any water. If they do, we should continue to see even more directed narrative and manipulation that's present within the way this article is being presented to us. Reading on into the article. Imagine a day when supermarket aisles stock a large selection of cell-based or plant-based meat while maintaining a limited selection of farmed meat. Some entrepreneurs, such as the co-founder and chief executive of Shiak Meats, Dr. Sandhya Sriram, dream of such a scenario and are taking bold steps to make this a reality. Quote, "So our vision is that you as a consumer walk into a supermarket in the coming years and you go to the frozen section to buy your meat and seafood, and you see a whole aisle of cell-based protein and another aisle of plant-based protein, and probably a very small aisle, a very small shelf of traditionally farmed meat and seafood," said Sriram, a stem cell biologist by training. Even though Sriram hopes that, quote, "it will be plant-based and cell-based all the way so that we can see more animals outside," unquote. Okay. For this next section, to begin, I want to make note of the use of the words imagine, dream, bold, and vision. These terms carry a clear tone to them, and they're very likely being used in a way to direct the reader's thoughts regarding their acceptance of this new paradigm being presented by the CEO of this food company. One of the things that we want to do whenever we're reading news media, engaging with any kind of written articles or books or magazines, really any kind of media, We want to dig into the terms that are being used so that we can understand them, define them if we don't know them, and then look for any connecting patterns that we see within the terms so that we can start to get an idea of how the writer is thinking, how the writer is then presenting information, and see if that cues us into any contextual clues or ideologies or thought patterns that the writer is presenting for us. Something else that is interesting to make note of is the fact that the author is actually taking their language cues in their writing from the quote given by the representative of the synthetic meat company. Now, why would they do this? It's interesting to think about. In this kind of interview, the CEO of the company being examined is naturally going to cast their product in a positive light and do all that they can to get people on their side so that their business is able to survive in the market and become profitable or sustain profitability. Now, I take no issue with this whatsoever, and I fully believe in and support everyone's right to make a living as they see fit, as long as it's done so in an honest and integral way. My issue here lies in the fact that what we see is not simply an expose on an emerging company, but rather a type of hybrid advertisement for this new meatless world that is being envisioned here. The author is cueing off of the CEO's sales pitch, and they set the stage using language that is in line with how the CEO is speaking. The quote-unquote bold vision of the CEO is something that we should all try to imagine for ourselves. We're cued to view this as a dream. Dreams are meant to be chased and sought after in this day and age. They're definitely a very positive thing. It's interesting to think about this language as it's actually got this tone of being removed from reality. It's as if they want to create an alternate paradigm, a new thing that is not real yet. It's this fantastical imagery, imagining language that is really romantic, and it's romanticizing this idea. And I find that interesting, and I find the specific use of these terms to point towards exactly the type of directed narrative that I was looking for, or at least that I would be on the lookout for. This whole thing really is a classic example of narrative creation that is driven by emotional and fantastical imagery through subtle language cues. Personally, I find this dream that they're talking about, this new reality of a meatless world, to sound more like a nightmare. You may feel otherwise, and that is your right. That is an entirely different topic and discussion that I'd be happy to have on another forum. But what I wish to point out here is that there is a clear and deliberate stance being taken in this article, which is designed to direct the reader's thoughts towards a specific point of view regarding what is being presented. I find that very interesting, and it's definitely something that I think we all need to learn to deal with and learn to look out for whenever we're engaging with the media. This kind of thing happens on cable news networks all the time. In an earlier video, I mentioned the movie Network, and that is a really interesting movie to examine the development of what has come to be known as like narrative-driven news. There's no objective news anymore. The big channels of CNN and Fox, MSNBC, all those massive, even the fringe ones like Newsmax and those others, they are narrative driven in that they develop narratives that they then cue themselves off of. The talking heads push the narrative. There may be very, direct correlations to real current events, yet everything's going to be spun in such a way as to further an ideology, a worldview, a paradigm that fits the narrative that is being driven to the viewers. So we will continue next week in this article. There's much more to discover just in this first section alone, and I encourage anyone watching to please add any observations in the comments section below this video. I want to encourage discussion, and we can all discuss this topic together and hopefully sharpen one another as we dig into this material. So until next time, I hope you all stay safe. I hope you all take care of one another, look after your loved ones, and I hope you all stay diligent and vigilant with your minds continually on guard.